Okay, I'm going to get started now. Good morning, everyone. Everyone's here for the Rancher Overview training. Today, or I guess my name is Denise Shannon. I usually run these trainings once a month, every month, usually the second Thursday. It will usually be the same month to month, but you're welcome to come back again if you have further questions that you need help with or troubleshoot. Usually I'm accompanied by Shannon Williams today. Accompanied by Josh Curl. Josh, do you want to say hi?
Yep, hi everyone.
So Josh will be helping me answer questions that come in. If there's something that you guys request a demo, he'll let me know, and we'll get started. So today's objectives are basically like a technical introduction to Rancher. Basically, how do you get started from the beginning to get started and be able to deploy containers? We have only probably like 3 more slides to show you, and then I'm going to jump into the demo. I'll probably demo for about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the type of questions we get in. And then, yep, just like I said, we welcome questions. There on the sidebar of your GoToWebinar, there is like a little question answer box area that you can ask your questions. And any questions you ask, we'll try our best to answer them. So before you get started, things that we encourage users to use or read are the docs. So at docs.rancher.com, usually anything that I've demoed today, there's probably some blurb about it somewhere in the docs. Sometimes they're a little trickier to find, but hopefully you'll be able to find them. Next is forums.rancher.com. Here we have a pretty active community where, if you ask questions, people will help you. If you follow this announcements category, you'll be able to get announcements of our latest releases. So encourage you to sign up at the forums. You could also find us at either the forums or at GitHub. And then the main topics that we're going to cover today for Rancher is setting up Rancher, how to set up access control or authentication, creating events, attaching registries to your environments, attaching registries to your environment, how you add resources or hosts. We'll go into creating stacks and services, how to load balance, how service discovery works. We'll cover most things in the UI. I'll show you a little bit about the API, and then we'll talk about the CLI. We'll go through some examples of Compose and the CLI, Rancher Compose and the CLI. We'll cover what's in the Rancher catalog, and then if you're well aware of Rancher, we also support a couple different container orchestrators, so we'll show the concepts of Kubernetes, Swarm, and Mesos, and how you could get up and running with that. There's many more topics within Rancher that we could talk about, but this is like more of a intro training to Rancher. So if you come back again, you'll probably hear the same demo, but the questions area is always open, and we try our best to answer them, and if it's something that you want to see how to do it, we'll show you that. Okay, let's get started. Let me switch just to my main screen. Get out of the slides. Okay, so the only thing I've done in preparation for this training has been that I've spun up a bunch of boxes in AWS, running Rancher OS version 0.7.1. I like to use Rancher OS personally because 1, is a product we make, 2, because you don't actually have to install Docker. Docker comes with it, so you can get started right away. And then I have a bunch of boxes, so let me just, this is my main box. So far I have this one box. All I did was I started Rancher server about, a half hour, hour ago, with the basic command of basically running a container where it's detached, exposing port 8080, because that's where we expose it for Rancher server, and then I took our latest tag, which is 130, and started that. For installing Rancher server, under installing, you can see we have options of how to install Rancher server as a single container, so you could use Rancher. It comes with a MySQL database within it.
Presentation showing? Yeah, there's 2 people saying they don't see your screen.
Let's see. And didn't push the play button. I'm sorry, everyone. Okay, let's go back. Thank you. Should have checked with you earlier. Okay, so back to my boxes. You can see here, all I did was run this command, a Docker run command. The port's exposed with a restart policy of only restart it if it was running, if your server gets rebooted, and then the image that we're using for today. And you can see I have it up and running. It's been up for about 40 minutes. We can go into the logs to see basically when you start the server, this is kind of what you'll see if you follow the logs. You'll see the environment variables. You'll see our initiation of starting up. And then basically the UI doesn't become available until somewhere in here. It used to be here, under here, it says starting WebSocket proxy, listening on 8080. At that point, the UI is now available. And then I can show you the UI. I'll go to the UI in a sec, but I wanted to cover over the different ways you can install Rancher. So today we're going to cover over just installing a single container that uses the database that's within the Rancher server image. The other options is you could use our container and point to an external database. We highly recommend that because, if your container goes down and gets destroyed or something, then you would have lost all your data. So pointing to an external database is highly recommended. You could bind mount your MySQL volume. We have an HA setup. I'm hoping, I spun up an HA setup a little bit ago that I'm hoping to be able to show to you at the end just how easy it is, especially with our latest releases of how to get HA set up. Outside of that, we also have how to install Rancher Server with SSL. There's all different examples of what you could do if you want. And finally, if you wanted to set up there, I know there are people out there who can't access Docker Hub for some reason. So how to launch Rancher Server without internet access, so that exists, and we go through the discussions of how you do that. So that's all under the docs under installing Rancher. So let's see. I think this is my box. Yep. So here, once you first come into Rancher, the first thing you're going to see is a welcome to Rancher. It's going to ask if you want to let us collect some stats from us. It's really helpful for us because what it does is it allows us to figure out, gives us direction of where we should concentrate our development on. If you're using more of our cattle environments or Kubernetes, it just lets us know information like that so we can, make sure we're making the product better for everyone out there. So I'm going to uncheck it because internally they don't prefer us not to show it. Here you get in, and first you'll be in what's called a default environment. You'll see a couple tabs, and the very first one I always recommend, which has this big red exclamation point, is for access control is not configured. And so that means basically anyone out there right now, if you go to this IP, you'll be able to access my Rancher server. So obviously I want to lock it down. I would go to access control. Access control is just basically adding authentication in front of your Rancher server setup. So we have support for Active Directory, Azure AD, GitHub authentication. You could do local, which is having it your own database. You can do Open ASAP. In our most recent release, we added Shibboleth or SAML for those who are using out there. Basically, there are a couple things to note. One is if you choose, AD or Open LDAP and you want to do it over TLS, you would actually have to start Rancher Server with a specific certificate in the command. And so those directions are in Rancher Server somewhere here. Let's see, down here, enabling Active Directory or Open LDAP for TLS. Oh yeah, there's some notes if you run behind a proxy, what you would need to do. So today, the easiest one for me is to just pick local because I can make whatever accounts or whoever I want. So I'll make myself one. Give myself a password and enable local auth. One thing about authentication is we don't recommend you starting with one provider and then switching to another because that would That workflow is not actually tested. We usually assume that, once you get started with Rancher, you'll pick one authentication provider and go forward with that. So now that access control is turned on, now you can see if I actually try and access my setup, open Safari in a different browser, instead of automatically going to it, you'll get prompted with, credential information. So after that, there's I automatically enabled it. When I automatically enable it, I get logged in. I'm logged in as an admin. You can see under accounts the type of accounts you have. For local authentication, this is where you would add in an account. I'm going to go add one in for Josh. In here, you can set someone up as either a user or an admin. So the differences between a user and admin is one has access to the admin tab and the other does not. And I'll cover over what's under the admin tab. So I'm just going to put Josh as a user, create. So now if he wanted to, he could log in. And as using local authentication, this is how you would be able to add accounts. Now, if you're using GitHub or like any AD or any of the other providers that have kind of groups or teams, you could add, invite those groups or teams or individual users on the pages, and then you wouldn't add accounts itself, because what Rancher does is it would sync up with like your AD server, and so they would then have access to be able to log in, and after they log in, an account would show up on the screen. After it shows up, then they automatically get logged in as a user, and if you wanted to promote them to admin level, you would come to this page after they've signed in, and then you could edit it and promote them basically to an admin. So under the admin tab, we have an audit log. This is really helpful. You can see, especially once authentication is turned on, you can see which users are doing which API calls. I've used it before where a stack had disappeared in a setup, in like a group setup, and use this to track down who deleted it and ask if they meant to or not. So highly recommend, if you have funny things going on in your account, you can go down here to track who's been doing stuff. Under processes, you can see basically all the processes that have run or are running. Usually if you have some issues with Rancher, you can come in to this tab to learn more about what is going on. It will give you like the ID, so you can kind of narrow down maybe like which container it's related to. That's really good for our admins for troubleshooting. This HA tab is new to me. So this is just showing, I guess, if you have HA set up. I don't have it for this one. I just start it regularly. And then we have machine drivers and settings, and I'll cover what is in those and where those relate to as we go through the product a little bit more. Okay, usually I pause here to see if there are any questions specifically in anything that I've covered so far that would be good to answer. Okay, hold on one sec.
Can you request to see Rancher NFS?
Okay, I can definitely cover Rancher NFS after.
This one too, which is more generally like AWS data persistence. That's kind of like Rancher NFS though.
Yeah, I'll do a demo. I have if you were here last month, I did not have my NFS server running, but this month I made sure to have it running so we can cover NFS after I do it. Okay, so the next kind of concept in Rancher is probably environment. So after you set up access control, now you're basically lock out people. You might want to set up different environments. So as of 1.2, we've introduced a concept called environment templates. Basically, they're templates that you can use to create your environments. This is where you can set up what kind of orchestration you want to pick. You can select, if you want to automatically add external DNS to that environment. There's like 2 types of networking you could select if you wanted. Here's where you could, enable Rancher NFS for that environment automatically. And then we have a couple default services that we recommend running that's almost required in most cases to be able to get networking running and health checks working. You automatically get default templates for our main orchestrators, so you don't need to do anything unless you specifically want to program stuff or make your own template specifically. So here you can see we automatically create a default template. It's considered unhealthy because I haven't added any host to it. There's some infrastructure stacks, but you could add environments. And here, this is probably questions of how, so I've invited Josh, but I don't actually want him to see my default environment. If he came in, he would actually not be able to see it at this point. So I could create a dev environment. I can add in Josh to view that specific environment itself. Under the environments is where you can have different roles to each environment. So you can be an owner. That basically means you have full access to that environment, everything that's in it, all the resources, which are hosts, your services, containers, stacks. You could be an owner or a member. They both have the same amount of access. The only difference is owners can update this membership list and edit people's roles, whereas members are basically just have access to it. And then we have two other, a little more restrictive roles that exist. So we have one is read-only, kind of self-describing. Basically, you can only look around, but you can't actually touch anything. You can't start or stop or delete anything. And then we have restricted. So restricted is also, in our world, we kind of call it the developer role. So basically, as a DevOps person, you might want to set everything up and add all your hosts to it, but then when you start inviting developers, you don't actually want them to touch the infrastructure. So you can give them this restricted mode, which basically only allows them to start launching services and containers. So here I can create, here you can see that environment is going. So I'm currently up here is where you'll be able to see the list of environments you have access to. So these are the environments as an admin. You have access to be able to view everyone's environments under the environments, the manage environment screen, which is this one. But in the dropdown, we only show you the environments that you actually have been given explicit access to see. So usually the next step I like to do is to actually, I'll add environments. I'm going to add a Kubernetes one. Let's create it just so you can see. I'm going to actually switch to it, and I'm going to start to launch my Kubernetes hosts, launching hosts between at least all the orchestrators except for Windows are exactly the same. So I'll cover it in the Kubernetes demo just to get it going because we launch a lot more services to get the Kubernetes networking working, and then I'll come back to actually using Kubernetes later in the demo. I'll switch to this environment. Here you can see you kind of can't do anything until you add at least a host, so I'll go to the infrastructure host page. Here you're going to add a host. So the first time you add any host into Rancher, you're going to be prompted for this host registration URL. What that is how is the Rancher agent container, which is launched on your host, going to be able to contact your Rancher server container? So usually I just leave it as the default. You can obviously change it if you have a domain available or if you use a different port. And you'll see that this URL is then used as part of when we launch the Rancher agent container. So I'm going to save this. This is one of the settings under admin settings that you can configure at that level as well if it changes. Here under adding hosts, we have by default the option to add any custom hosts. So in my case today, I have a bunch of hosts that I already have set up and running. I will go and end up copying the command to launch the Rancher agent container. You can see the URL here of where the Rancher server is. And then it has this unique token to be able to say which environment this host is being added to. So we have custom. We also support a bunch of machine drivers. So if you add anything through the UI, we're just calling Docker machine. We have, by default showing only 4 machine drivers, but we actually have a lot more available. As the admin, this is the machine driver section I kind of glanced over earlier, where you can add whatever machine driver you want. You can see the ones that we have by default already packaged into Rancher that you can just enable. So I could enable like Rackspace. I'll enable a couple so we can see what they look like. You could also add your own machine driver. So if you have one yourself, you can add it yourself. You can even make a custom UI versus we have one that's a generic UI if you don't have that. And then we'll go back to adding our hosts. Now when I click on add hosts, you'll now see that I have all the options that I had enabled in that screen. You could also disable it. So say if you don't want users to be able to add hosts through any of those drivers and only use custom, you could do that if you want. So I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to do one, I'm going to go through the UI for DigitalOcean, just because that's a really easy use case. I'm going to pause my screen as I grab my access key. Start my screen again. So you'll need your access token. Get it started. I'll say my host. I'm going to launch 3. You can select, just like in Docker Machine, you know, all the options that are there are also available in Rancher. We try to keep up to date with the latest Docker Machine releases. So, you know, when new regions, the biggest one I can think of is when new regions get added into AWS, we make sure to pick up the latest machine drivers so that when you come to the screen, you'll also be able to pick those new regions. You can select, you know, the images that you want, size, different things, and then Docker Machine supports a whole array of other options that you can click on. I am going to add a label. Let me see which app I want to put on here. So you can add in labels onto hosts. The reason why you might want to add a label onto a host is for scheduling and when you want to schedule your containers to pick which hosts you want them to go on. I'll cover the scheduling rules in a little bit, but I'm going to just add some hosts to some labels to my hosts. So we have, the reason why I do the DigitalOcean ones first is because you'll see what it's going to do. It's going to call a Docker Machine call. Then what that does is it goes to DigitalOcean. It will create the droplet. It will then SSH in. It will, I think, install Docker. That's all, like all the items under Docker Machine. And then after Docker is installed, we then run the Rancher agent command that was shown on the custom screen onto these hosts. Once that Rancher agent container is started up and running, you'd be able to access these hosts and they'll show up. So I'm now going to grab, I just realized we're in the Kubernetes. Okay, I'm going to let this actually run. I'm going to add some hosts using the custom command. And grab this, and then I just need to find where my Kubernetes hosts are. Here they are. And then I'm going to just run this command. There we go. And here you can see it's just starting to run these commands. All I've done on these boxes, as I said before, is I just preloaded a bunch of images just to make the demo a little faster. Here, we'll close this. Here you'll see, this is probably a good demo. So here you'll see the 3 ones with these that are already active. Those are my machines that I had pre-populated with images, and so it automatically got started. Here you can see on one of my DigitalOcean boxes, it says an error detecting OS getting, there's some error. This error is usually Docker Machine related. It's actually nothing Rancher can do specifically. If you're getting errors in Rancher and you're unsure whether it's Docker Machine related or it's a Rancher error, you can actually go into the Rancher server logs and you should be able to find the Docker Machine command in the logs that was used. You could grab that command, you could run it using Docker machine to see if you have any issues outside of Rancher server. That's always a good troubleshooting tip. So here you can see these starting and launching all of our infrastructure services. I'm going to cover that in our defaults. Okay. So I just came to our default catalog. Sorry, I'm just came to our default catalog. I'm going to add some hosts. There's just service running, but I don't expect it. Okay, so I'm going to grab the command. I am going to find my 3 hosts. Launch those. So they should come up fairly soon. I'm going to go to the infrastructure stack. So in this page, you can see we've automatically deployed what we call infrastructure services or infrastructure stacks. And essentially, these are kind of the framework or plumbing that needs to be done for, all the things that Rancher is great about cross-host communication, about your containers being able to see each other across hosts, load balancing, service discovery, health checks. We moved them all out into these microservices so that, if we find a bug in one of those microservices, we could just automatically update. We add it to our catalog, our Rancher catalog, which is where these are pulled. And then if there's an update that's available, you would be able to automatically see an upgrade available and be able to upgrade to that newer version. And so the reason why we moved to these microservices is that it's a lot quicker turnaround for us to be able to fix bugs instead of having to create a whole new Rancher server release for bug fixes. So when you get started, we highly recommend, every so often, especially as the admin, come in, check out your infrastructure stack, see if there's an upgrade available, and schedule some time to be able to upgrade these microservices so you're running the latest and greatest. Okay, so one thing, so I've added some hosts. Next is probably where we'll start getting into launching services or containers. One thing before we get started is I know I was going to talk about registries. So by default, we connect to Docker Hub. If you have your own private registries or, your other registries located other places, you can put in your username and password for Docker Hub. You can set up your own custom ones so that if you want to pull from those locations, you can. So that's under infrastructure registries. Okay. I'm going to pause to see if there's any questions. Josh?
I don't think there's any that you could demo right now.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, we'll keep going. So next is finally, let's launch some things. It's drive me crazy. Okay. We're going to launch. So stacks. So stacks is a Rancher concept, and basically it's a way to group your services. So here we have these stacks that come, and then these services underneath. And then what a service is it's basically just a container. It's a container with a scale, is what I call it. So here I'm going to add my own new stack. I'm going to call it my blogging stack. And then I'm going to add a service. So here, you could run one container. I could run 3 containers. I could always run one instance of this container on every host. So there's a lot of options in terms of what you want to do for scale. And then basically, like I said before, it's just a Docker container. So anything that a Docker run command can do, you should be able to find that option within our UI here. So here I will do my Ghost app. I'm going to pick this Ghost blogging application. Okay, a couple of things that's always good to point out. One is there's this little checkbox called always pull image before creating. So as it says, anytime before it launches a new container, it will always pull the image before it creates. So this is really helpful for developers who are using the same tag over and over again. So like if you push out a change, you could stop or delete that container, and when it gets recreated, it would be pulling your latest image beforehand. If you're using, like for me, if I'm using, especially that I pre-pulled all my images, it will actually slow it down. So I tend to check it off if you know it's not an image that you're going to want to re-pull every time it comes up. Here for this one, there is a port 2368 that's exposed on the container. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to map that so that on my host will open up that port so I can go and get directed into the container. And then here, I think the first 4 tabs are all like Docker run options. Next we have health check. So health check is a Rancher concept where basically you can put a health check on a container so that, you know, say I have a scale of 3 containers. If I have a host that goes down or not even go down, if I have a host that Rancher server can no longer connect to Rancher agent, what it will do is if you don't have a health check, Rancher just assumes that, you know, just because that connection is gone, it doesn't mean that the container is gone. And so we just assume that it's running. If you have a health check and now the health check is now failing because Rancher can't communicate with its hosts, it would automatically start a new container on another active host for you. So highly recommend adding health checks to your services. Next is labels. You can add labels to your services. And all labels for services and for hosts is mostly used for scheduling. So here we can add scheduling rules to say, you know, I want the hosts to must have or must not, or you could do hard or soft affinity, so should or should not have, and then so we have all these different labels, so either host label, a container label, service name, container name, that matches a specific key value pair. So I could put in like I want it scheduled on some hosts that must have this label ghost equals true. Let's see, I'm going to create it. So here I knew it was going to fail, where basically it was going to say that the scheduling fails because it needs a host with a label ghost equals true. And I don't have any hosts that have that, so I'm going to edit one of my hosts and add in this label now. You can add the label in now, or you could add the label in when you add the host as well. So 2 options of where you could add in labels. And then what should happen is that it should pick up and notice that I have a host that has these labels. Oh, there it is. So there's a reconcile that eventually will happen. So it finally started one of my containers. But what it will do is it will still be stuck because I had set a scale of 3, but I only have 1 host that has that label. So it'll continue to kind of give you this warning message that, hey, you don't have enough hosts that have this label. I'm just going to edit it, my service today, and bring it down to just 1. And then now you can see my service is up in green. Everything is happy. Here in your stack, you can see the services you have running. If you expose the port, you could just click on the port. It'll direct you to, you know, the host IP that is running that container and the port that you've exposed. You can see I'm now in my Ghost application. There are 2 handy things that I like to show. One is there's this little information icon next to each container name or service name that you can click on. What it shows is high-level detail of the service. So it'll show you like some details. The main cool feature is that it shows you all the containers that you have running, so you can see what's going on with the containers. You can right-click on them to, you know, exec into them, view their logs, restart them. So you can do the actions on the containers just from this little tab. It'll show you all the hosts that are running the container if I had more than 1, and show you if you had any links. So that's a like really high-level, easy way of just showing off being able to start launching services. I'm going to do a slightly not that much more complicated application. I am going to do, let's see, call it something. Here I'm going to add a service. So I'm going to actually add a lot of these. I'm going to call it my app. So I'm going to take my coworker's image, and what she has this image where basically it's an NGINX container where if you go to a specific URL, it will show you the container ID of it. I'm not going to expose any ports because I actually want to load balance this. I'm going to make sure to uncheck always pull image. And then I'm going to add a health check on this so that we can also see how health checks work when a host goes down. Let's create this image. So while this goes, I'm also going to launch now a load balancer. So here you can add a load balancer. There's like all these options for load balancers that we have support for. If you aren't familiar with load balancing or want to learn more, or want to learn more specifically of how Rancher handles it, or the concepts under Rancher, under the docs, under cattle, under load balancers, we go into details of how to add load balancers and all the options in the UI. And then we also cover all the options through Compose or the CLI. Okay, so I'm going to just put a source port of 80. I'm going to target my application, which has port 80 open. Here you can see there's the different options with the load balancer. Within the latest releases, as of 1.2, we added the ability to completely customize HA proxy. So our load balancers within Rancher are all HA proxy load balancing, or HA proxy software. Okay, let's create this. And here I have one load balancer. It'll come up. Should come up shortly. So here, let's go under our host. See where our load balancer is.
There's a request to scale up a container just for 2 hosts. Can you demo that if you have time?
Scale up a container for 2 hosts. So there's no guarantee that if you scale up a container, it will guarantee to scale to 2 hosts. That's a just because of the scheduler. But if you wanted to, if you had a service that you want to specifically schedule so that it is not running on the same hosts, there's an option to do that. Sorry, I had to think about how exactly to say that. Let's go back. I'll add a service here. I will test scale. So here I could do run one container. So under scheduling, you could add a rule to say the container must not have a service with basically myself. Okay, I've never done this through the UI, I'm going to admit. So there's an easy rule I know through Compose of how to do it, but let's see if this should work. So if I create this, and here I'm going to have one container of this running on this host address, and now if I scale this up, it should automatically, and does go to a different host. And then if I actually scale, I'll scale up to 4, which is like one more than number of hosts we have. It should error out to schedule. The scheduler should error out to say, hey, you don't have any hosts available because of that one rule. And just as expected, that's what it says. It basically says scheduling failed because I don't have a container that has that one rule. So if you want to be able to have your services like spread across, guaranteed spread across, you should, I recommend using that scheduling rule. And then it'll keep trying to reconcile and try and find another host. So I'm going to edit this. back down, 3. Okay, I'm going to go back to my load balancing. Sorry for jumping around. Let's go back to the load balancing applications. Let's recap. I made this service that has like 9 containers running somewhere. I made a load balancer to point to this service. Now if I go to that port, you'll see I'm in this nginx container. I could refresh, and that won't really do a whole lot for us because all the containers are the same. But if I go to /name.html, you can see that I have a container ID. I could probably actually poke around to find out which host it is on. So let me see if I can find it. Here, CEF-A, that's the container that's on here. So that's on this middle host that I have here. If I refresh, it brings up another container ID, which is, up here you go, is on this other host that I have available. And so if I keep refreshing over and over, our load balancers automatically are enabled with the round robin algorithm, so just jump from container to container. So that's how load balancing kind of works, at least at a high level. You can obviously target many. Let's kind of go over a high level. So all I did was a really simple use case of load balancing. We support, like, I think it's L7 load balancing, so like to be able to use your own host names, your own paths, to be able to target different services based on the host name and path. We support different protocols. If you select HTTPS, you would have to then add certificates. So there's lots of different options available in Rancher today. So go read the docs. You can read more about all those complicated ones. We don't have time to go over them. So we'll move on. So we've done the high level of basically adding services, adding load balancers, and what I'm going to do next is cover kind of like how you can use Rancher. So I've kind of talked about a little bit here and there about how like I know how to do some things in Compose, but maybe not in the UI. So Rancher supports kind of like 3 different ways to access and be able to use it. So one is the UI. Everything so far I've shown today is in the UI. Anything that you do in the UI can actually be done through the API. So our API, we have 2 versions of the API right now. We have a V2 beta and V1. If you're starting to do stuff, we recommend using V2 beta. There are a couple differences in the API versus the UI. The main difference is that, I'm trying to think, one of them got fixed in V2 beta. I think environments are called projects in the API. For V2 beta, if you use V1, there's another like swap around of things, but environments of what we call in the UI is a project in the API. If you go to our docs and you do want to check out and play around with the API, you can go to the docs. It tells you about what the terminology differences that are there, how to be able to do a couple of the more complicated things in the API. So anything that we've done in the UI is really just an API call. So, and then there's a couple things about the API you should know is there are 2 types of keys. This has definitely tripped up people recently, so I want to cover it today. So there's account API keys and environment level API keys. So account keys would basically be creating a key like associated with the user, so in my case, me, where all the environments, I could access all the different environments and do different things. There are environment level specific keys that are geared towards saying if I wanted to launch services, I could use this endpoint instead to directly go into that environment to start launching things. Let's view the API. Okay. So here you can go into the API. You can see all the different options we have available. The API is also locked down, like once you turn on access control, like no one can actually view it. Someone could you could add in a key to be able to start accessing it. So I'll add environment API key. I'll go back to my Chrome browser. And I'll just go to V2 beta. Here I can take this access key and secret key and put it in. And I'll be able to log into that specific environment. And from that environment, like before, I created a service. Here I could also create services. We have a whole different types of services that you could create, but create services with all the different options that you want to put in. So anything that you do in the UI is also API call. Let's see. And then the next thing is basically the CLI. So we have two versions of CLI. So we have Rancher Compose. What Rancher Compose does is kind of just launches services into specific environments. And then we also have our Rancher CLI. I think going forward, we'll probably be focusing more on the CLI because anything that you do with the CLI using Rancher up is the same as doing a Rancher Compose up. So I'm going to download the CLI, start it. Let's see. Let's rename this to my demo. Oh, already exists. So let's navigate. My screen. Okay, so let's go to where I downloaded. Okay, so here you can see I have the binary. So what we can do, well, there's lots of things that you can do. The first thing you do is, if you decide to use Rancher CLI, you need to configure it first. So we do a Rancher config. You can put in the URL of your Rancher setup. You add in your access key. So if you're using Rancher CLI, you want to add an account API key. If you're using Rancher Compose, you use an environment key. The difference, again, is like here with Rancher CLI, you have actually a lot more options. You'll be able to select which environment you want to play with. I'm going to go default. Here with Rancher, there are a lot of options to be able to list what catalog. You can launch catalog items from here. We'll talk about catalog in a little bit. You can run Docker commands on specific hosts and environment. If you've added those hosts using the UI or Docker machine, you can add hosts from here in your environment. You can make changes. You can create environments. You can basically create stacks, stop stacks, start, stop. A lot of the options that you can do in the UI, you can now do in the Rancher CLI. I'm going to do a demo of just how to launch some stacks. So here under the stacks, so as I said, a Rancher up is the same as a Rancher Compose up, and what Rancher Compose does is it mimics kind of what Docker Compose does. So we take in a Docker Compose YAML and a Rancher Compose YAML and start services based on that. So I'm just going to grab a couple of things. So here, if you're brand new to Rancher or brand new to Docker itself, sometimes it's probably easier to actually use the UI, and then as you get more advanced into it, you might actually want to then start looking into the CLI. And you might want to start looking at Docker Compose YAML. So a cool feature that Rancher has is you can go to a specific stack. You can click on this little paper icon, or under here you can, it's called View Config. You can see what the Docker Compose YAML and Rancher Compose YAML equivalent of your services are. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to save it. I'm going to put my Rancher Compose. Put that in. save that. So now I have 2 files. So now if I do a rancher up, I'll create a testing CLI. There we go. We do rancher up, so basically it reads the Docker Compose and rancher Compose YAML to be able to see what services there are, and then it starts to create the services. And here under user, you can see it's starting to create them automatically. So it's kind of neat, I think. If you want to learn about how to use CLI or rancher Compose, it's all in the documentation. Rancher Compose is a little more hidden under cattle, because it's cattle specific. Or you could read about rancher CLI itself. Let's see. Okay, so almost 11, and we're getting closer and closer. Let's keep going. Okay, so next is our catalog. I've referenced the catalog, but I haven't shown it. So here we have 2 types of catalogs, and what the catalog is just we have a catalog service that reads catalog templates, and the templates are just Docker Compose and rancher Compose YAML files. Here you can see under the library, these are the kind of the files that we have, or sorry, the templates that we have available in our catalog. You can check out our catalog at GitHub. It's pulling everything in the library, is pulling from the infra templates. That's where all these are coming from, and here you can see them. This is a great time to show how the catalog works by launching rancher NFS. So here, we have 1 version available. I got to grab my NFS server information. I'm going to grab it and put it in, and then I'm going to launch it. I'm just going to pause my screen real quick. Okay. Let's go back. I'll go back while that gets set up. I'll choose another. So we have our infrastructure services, and then we also have our community catalog. So the community catalog is also in GitHub. It's public. As its name indicates, it's all community contributions. We have lots of templates from the community, which is great. Here you can see you can add in like all types of things. Great thing of why you would use the catalog. That's usually what would you want to do with it. So I'll take Elasticsearch. So here you could start with an older version. Say I started originally with 1 template and 1 version of my service or my application. I go and deploy it. And then later on, I realize, like, oh, I want to make a change to it. It's already deployed in Rancher. Like, how can I update it or upgrade it? So Rancher supports individual service upgrades. So if I go to any of these, any of my services, I could click on upgrade, and basically you can make any changes to what you would want your container to be, and you could upgrade it. Here, I'll add a label to this one. It will start to upgrade, and what upgrade does is it will stop an existing container and start a new container with the new rules. Or not new rules, the new container that you want. After it is done upgrading, you'll get into an upgraded state where then you can start verifying that your new container is running as expected. And once you confirm that it's running as you expect, you would finish your upgrade to basically delete your old containers. So that concept exists like on an individual service level, but if you have an application that might have lots of changes throughout it, it's easier to use the catalog and have a template that has multiple services, and then make the changes within your services. Push out a new template to GitHub or wherever you're. Right now we only support GitHub to launch your catalog, and then once you launch a new template, this little button will go from saying up to date, like these ones, to say upgrade available. So here, I'm going to click on. Once it gets up and running, I'll click on upgrade available, and you'll be able to, select which version of the template you now want to run, and then do the same process of upgrading it. It'll upgrade all the services. It'll get into an upgraded state, and then you can click on Finish Upgrade once everything's up and running and happy. So this appears to be taking a little longer than I would like. So for the catalog, so by default, Rancher is packaged with a default catalog with the library catalog, which is where we host all of our infrastructure services. And then we also have community catalog. So as an admin, under the admin tab, under settings, under catalog, you might want to disable the community catalog. You don't want your users to be able to start using it. You could add your own private catalog. So, that's the power of the catalog, is the fact that, you could create your own templates and launch them themselves. The catalog needs to be structured, or at least in a specific way. So under Rancher catalog, there's creating private catalogs, and it'll tell you, how to set up your directory structure so that, our catalog service can read it and start interpreting what you want into it. And so we have all different options available. So it covers it in the docs here. And then in their settings, under catalog, you would then add your catalog, where you'd add the name, the URL, and then which branch you're pointing to. Let's see if this is up and running. Okay, so this is now active, up and running. Click on Upgrade Available. It'll show me which version I'm currently running, as well as what are the new versions available out there. So you can select one, select it, I can click Upgrade, and then it will start to upgrade the services that have changed in that template. Okay, so let's see if I will then go to NFS. So my NFS server should be up and running. So I have my NFS driver up and running. Under storage, you can see that my volume driver is running, and it's running on these 3 hosts. I'll add a new stack for this part. So here, I'm going to create a service. I do a really simple use case. Or basically, I will go into, let's see, into 1404. I'll call it volume testing. I'm going to scale it high. And then under volumes, I'm going to type in Rancher NFS. I'm going to add a volume. So here, under adding a volume, you can, since I want to use my volume driver, I give it a volume name. So I'm going to call it Denise. And then I'll put a colon, and then you put the path that you want inside your container. So I'll give it a very creative name of Denise in container. So we will create this. So here I have 5 containers being spun up, and I'm going to log into this. We'll wait for these to come up. This will take a little bit longer because I actually don't have this image pre-pulled on my hosts. So it just needs to get started. Okay, let's start looking at some things. Under storage, you can see I have my Denise volume. You can see the containers, the mounts in the containers, and what the path is. As you use more of the volume driver, this will continue to show all those options. I can now go, where did it go? I already forgot what I called it. NFS test. Okay, let's go into this container. So now I'm going to go into this top container here. I'm going to exec into it. Here you'll be able to see that there is, my folder Denise in container. I'm going to navigate in there. I'm going to create a file that's going to say, oh, I've used this volume name before in my NFS server. So here you can see my volume already has information from previously when I used it. That's interesting. Today is January 12th. I save my file. My file is now actually in Sorry, I'm just thinking about why that's there and how it would work. Okay, I'm going to do another test in a little bit. Let's actually make a new file. This is the problem when you use the same NFS server and the same volume names and the same file names. Okay. Created a new file. Here you can see I have these two files. I have my original test and now test1.yaml. I did that in my first container. I'll take some container further below. If I execute into there, go into my path. Here you'll see I have both files. If I look at one of them, you can see that file also exists in this container. It shows testing 1, 2, 3. I can also show the file that was already there. And what you could do is I could make some changes. Into my container, into that file. I'll save it. Let's just make sure I'm saved. So here you can see I'm in vol testing. So the naming structure of all your services tend to be stack name, or for your containers will always be stack name, service name, and then we append a number on it. So this is the third container of my service. I'll go into a different one, exec into that one, and then if I show the contents of my test1.yaml, it says the changes I made earlier. It has the files, has those files. If I make changes here, it will basically propagate all those changes to all the containers in the service. Hopefully that shows what NFS example you want. I'm just going to do one thing just for what I think. So as I said before, I was a little shocked when I saw that in my test YAML that there was already contents in there. But I do use the same names for my training, and I have had the same NFS server for a while. It has just actually stopped at my last training. So I'm going to test to see if I actually use that same driver, if I use that same volume, if it just automatically adds the files in that volume to my container. So here, under storage, you'll see that it will eventually come up to say NFS test-test2 and then my containers. It's going to take a little bit again because, oh, I forgot to put a path name. Oh, this is good. Okay, so I forgot to put a path name. I'm going to upgrade this. I don't actually have to make it again. I'm just going to create that. I'm going to uncheck my box. Now it should go along happily. That's weird. Okay. Clone this instead. So there's a couple options. So you can upgrade a service. So you can take an existing service, you can upgrade it, and it'll change that same one. There's also a clone option. So say something goes wrong and you don't know why, kind of like what I have here. You can clone it. It'll save all the details of that container, and then you can edit it as you want. I don't know why. Okay. Oh, it did work. Okay. It was just, okay, I know what happened. It was just reconciling. Okay. So now I have my one container. I use the same volume as before. You can see under storage that my volume is being used by different services. So now it's like being shared across. I'm going to go into that container. Go into this one. I'm going to exec into this one. And yeah, so the reason, so the files that I had already in this volume are already automatically used or in this container because I'm using our volume driver. Okay. So I know it's already after 11. I don't know if there's any other specific questions. So for Rancher NFS, in terms of how to use volumes and stuff, there's a bunch of documentation under docs, under infrastructure services, persistent storage service. It talks about it doesn't talk about necessarily Rancher NFS specific, because we have Rancher EBS and Rancher EFS that are experimental that you can also play around with, but it does talk about the different types of volumes and how you can scope them in Rancher, so that you could have what we call the stack scope volume. So anything in that one stack would be used, that volume is only available for that one stack. All the volumes that we create currently in the UI are all environment scopes, so that they could be shared across all different stacks. So there's more details there.
Somebody asked what's going to, they can see what happens to that Kubernetes environment that was created.
Oh yeah, so that's what I'm going to go to next. So I know I'm finished with Cattle. I'm going to go to Kubernetes next. I did not forget about it, don't worry. So Kubernetes here, let's see. We have, I think, 5 active hosts. We have that one that errored out earlier because something went wrong with Docker machine. I'm just going to delete that. And then we have our 5 hosts. For Kubernetes, we have our normal infrastructure services, and then we also, on top of that, we have our Kubernetes. So these are all the services we need to launch to be able to get Kubernetes up and running. Currently, our default version in 1.3 is Kubernetes 151 using SkyDNS. There's a bunch of options of how you can view the different Kubernetes services in Rancher. I do think that we're actually moving towards using just the dashboard in, sorry, I'm just thinking in Kubernetes, the native Kubernetes dashboard. Let's try and first launch some services in Kubernetes. So we have a handy shell that you could add in files here and start. I can at least see what nodes are available. See if there are any services. I don't have any replication controllers yet, so you can use the shell that's in the UI itself. You can also generate this configuration that we will use. I'm going to go to, I have templates already spun up. Oh, I also need to, let me type in my configuration for this setup. Okay, and now if I do control get nodes, it'll show me the different, show me the same information as if I did it through here. But now I can also, start creating my NGINX service. I can create, I have an ingress. So with the ingress, so Rancher supports like ingress files or ingress types in Kubernetes. And what it does is it, we have something called an LB controller, which kind of essentially reads, what the ingress is, and then it launches load balancers in Rancher to be able to use, follow your ingress rules. There's a couple things that are, I think, kind of unique to Rancher where we support that native Kubernetes doesn't support for ingress. I'm going to see what I know off the top of my head. One is the fact that, I think ingress can only support one port. So we can support multiple ports. We can support also, I think at least originally, Kubernetes could only support port 80, but using Rancher and Kubernetes, you could use whatever port number you want. We support multiple ports. There's ways to do host name routing. So L7 routing like before. So all those options are in the docs under Kubernetes, under ingress support, what we are have for support. Now I've launched those two things. Let's go back. Give me a sec. There is a small UI bug. Okay, so under deployments, so under services, you can see Kubernetes and Nginx Server. So if you got into kind of like what I just did, where it just keeps going to that add stack page, just do a hard refresh in your UI, and you'll be able to then start accessing the Kubernetes thing. So here you can see this is a Kubernetes, the Nginx service that I launched under my infrastructure stacks. Under ingress load balancers, you can see this is that load balancer that was created based off of the ingress. Click. I've never tested it.
Somebody asked why the nodes are in not ready state. Are they now?
Good question.
So Kubernetes environment?
I don't know why they're in not ready state. Which is weird because we're obviously using them. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that. I guess they usually do say ready. I don't know why they're not ready, because they're obviously, Kubernetes is obviously working for us, since I can see, like, if I do a kubectl get services, the services that I'm running are actually running. So I'll have to have someone take a look and see in engineering to see why that's occurring right now. So that's probably about as much Kubernetes. Oh, in Kubernetes, we have, it also has its own catalog. It has its own set of templates, which are different than from the cattle ones. A smaller subset, but they exist. Same thing, so you could create your own templates using, obviously not using Rancher Compose and Docker Compose, but Kubernetes templates. Okay, so I know we're over by 15 minutes. I don't know if anyone's interested in seeing an HA setup. I mean, you guys are welcome to go. I can cover it really quickly because it's super easy now. I like to show it off. So, installing Rancher under Rancher Server. Basically, you run the Rancher Server command, except you point to an external database and you specify what you add in extra arguments to the command to say, like, what is the IP of the address. So I already have this up and running somewhere. I just need to find it. Okay, so here, what I have in AWS is I have one instance that is running a database. In the database for external database, the only things you need to make sure is you need to set up that cattle. You have to create a database name and users, but no schema has to actually be created, like Rancher will do that. And so I have that up and running on a different instance, and then basically I ran the Rancher Server container command. There's one extra port you need to open up for communication for HA. I linked to my external database. There are notes about this in the docs, and then I'm just advertising the address of the IP. So that's up and running. So I did that on 3 different hosts, and then I was going to show, I have all my AWS, I have all different hosts. So then you create an ALB in AWS. So I can, let's see, let's create another one. So you want to do an application load balancer. Make it, you can listen on port 80. And then I want to target, let's see. Oh, so that must be, okay. I don't know where my instances are. I forgot. I'm going to go to the load balancer that already exists. So here, I already have an ALB already up and running. You can see that it's listening on port 80. I don't think there's no targets on it. going to a specific target group, and then in my target group, I don't actually have any targets, or do. Here you would edit, and here you could add your instances to your target group. So it's been a while since I've done it in AWS. So AWS, you create your ALB, you create what you want to listen to for the ALB, and then you add in what AWS calls a target group. Then on your target group, you add the instances that you have running, that are running Rancher, and then on what port is it running. So I have it on all my HA setups. We'll add, and then you want to make sure it's on port 8080, and then you save it. So now if I go to my load balancer, I go to domain name, it should serve up Rancher itself. And now what it does is you're in Rancher, and it's like, if you go to another one, it would also, it's like an HA setup. So if I kill one of my nodes that are running Rancher, another one would just be served to this load balancer itself. Here, a couple of things to know about an HA setup. One is if you want to add a host, you want to keep the host URL as your ALB DNS. You want to save that, and then you can add in hosts however you want. Another thing I know some people like to do that I just learned today is if you want to put an ALB in front of a single instance of Rancher, which you can do, the only thing is that in order for the ALB to actually direct it to Rancher, even though it's a single instance, is you would still need to publish this advertise address, which is part of the command, which lets basically the ALB tell Rancher connects through, I think, traffic instead of using WebSocket proxies to talk to each other. I don't know the exact details, but I'm going to add notes to the docs because I know there are a lot of people out there who are putting ALBs in front of a single instance of Rancher, and they're struggling with it with proxies. So.
I have a question on cleaning up after upgrading Rancher. Does that mainly refer to like getting rid of old images?
I'm not sure. It depends on what you want to say. It says to remove the old instruction. Oh. Okay. I don't think it says it stops Docker. Sorry, I was just reading the question. So when you upgrade Rancher, yes, your containers will still be running even though Rancher server is offline. So there's not like your containers are still running. You could and then when you start up Rancher again, it just connects to the database for to grab the information, and then it starts running the newest ones. So I'm not sure what you're referring to in cleanup. So a couple things that have been added to Rancher as of 1.2.1 maybe, I think, where in our previous instance of Rancher we didn't really like to delete anything, and so now we have a more active cleanup of just our database itself of, if you have old instances that have been removed from Rancher for a really long time, we'll like clean those up and get rid of them. I don't think that's what you mean by cleanup. So
it could be like the images that are left over from infrastructure services. So like when you do an upgrade, you're gonna have the old images.
Yeah, so Rancher doesn't do any cleanup of the images itself, but there is a program on the catalog called Janitor that one of our users contributed. I don't know if it's actually working right now. I remember reading a community issue that they had Janitor running, and I'm in Kubernetes, and it was having some issues with our latest. So I don't know if that community member has like fixed it to try and get it running.
But cleaning up images is a very general Docker problem, so it's not really specific to like Rancher images.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's everything I have to demo today. I covered a lot. Sometimes I talk really fast. I apologize. Sometimes I talk really slow because I'm thinking about why something occurred. If you have any more questions, please feel free to use the forums. Feel free to use GitHub. We're pretty active there. I try and be as active as I can on there. I run this training, as I said, every month. You can come back, you can ask more specific questions, kind of like how today someone said, like, can you demo NFS? I just demo it kind of on the fly. Whatever you want to know, I usually will try and do it if I know how to do it. And I think that's it. So everyone have a good day, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon. Bye.